You're tuned in to Tomfoolery.
Episode 12, we have today on the show, is it John Thomas?
Yeah, it's actually John Thomas. My Facebook name is John Thomas. You're from Ohio, right, Tom?
No, I'm from Atlanta.
You're from Atlanta. Your guest who I was listening to is from. I was thinking I must have got those mixed up. Okay, well, if you were from Ohio, you might be familiar with it. But there's a series of convenience stores around here called Sheetz, and they're everything they have. They end their names in Z's. Like their breakfast items are called schmuffins with a Z on the end. And they had a contest a while back who could be the biggest sellout for Sheetz. And I just put Z's on the end of my name to go on to go along with that. And nice. And I ended up winning their contest, got like $400 and gift cards from them. But ever since then, I've had Z's on the end of my name on Facebook. So it's John's Thomas is my Facebook name, but John Thomas is actually my real name in real life.
Okay.
It's not a very good fake identity.
Yeah, I always forget. Like I need a checklist of everything I need to do before a podcast starts. And number one should be ask them how to pronounce their name, because I swear on at least half of the episodes I've pronounced people's names wrong. So it's not just you, but
Well, you had an excuse with me because my name, I sent you the wrong name, not even thinking about the fact that my Facebook name is not my real name.
Yeah, that's fair. You cheated me on that one. Also, I guess one of the other ones that we normally do is we tell everybody to get dad jokes before the show. I totally forgot to tell you to get some dad jokes. So
yeah.
I'm screwing up. But all right, so we actually met because I was asking for a group of people who would like to come on and talk about anarcho capitalism. We're in a group together called Church and State, where I guess it's Christians who also want to discuss politics as well. And it was surprising to me how many are anarchists, and I guess it shouldn't be. Like a lot of the things that I guess I am almost like a halfway anarcho capitalist. Like a lot of the same ideas, a lot of the same. We both have like similar starting places. Let's say that. So we both start at. I believe that I have rights, that the rights are given to me by God and not by the government. And if I'm on a deserted island or I'm in China or I'm in the United States, I have the same rights no matter what. The government can't change these rights. They can only recognize these rights and nothing more. And so we both kind of start there. It's just where we go from there completely veers off in different directions. I am a conservative, and I have very conservative beliefs in every category you could think of, whether it's social conservatism or fiscal conservatism. I have very conservative beliefs. But let's start with social programs, okay? So if anybody who's watching, if you have watched, I did a streaming Saturday with a caller who called in also talking about anarcho capitalism, and we had long discussions about why he wouldn't buy into socialism and what he thinks is wrong with socialism and things like that. But if we can pull that back a little bit and say just social programs, okay? So simple things like, let's start with the necessities, okay? Let's start with the police, all right? So in an anarcho-capitalist system, you don't believe that there should be government whatsoever. So explain to me what that means, and then I guess delve into something like a police department or something like that.
All right, yeah, and I understand why a lot of Christians especially would be not enthused about, like, kind of be confused about the number of Christians who are anarcho-capitalists, because anarchy really means without archy, without any system like that. And you know from First Peter, you know from Romans 13, you know from various places in Scripture that God calls us to submit to our governing authorities, and without any sort of or without any archy, you don't have those. So I totally get where you're coming from without that. So, but one of the alternate words to describe an anarcho-capitalist is like a voluntarist. That all interactions should be voluntary. So let's take that with the police. If somebody breaks into my house and I want to call the police, and the police come and arrest that person, you'd say, well, that's not a voluntary transaction, right? That guy's clearly being cuffed against his will, and that would be a legitimate concern. But it all goes back to what's called the non-aggression principle, that you don't initiate aggression. So
now, real quick,
okay, yeah.
On the non-aggressive principle, I've heard this from Stefan Molyneux a million times, who used to be an anarchist.
Right.
Who came up with the non-aggressive principle?
That was Murray Rothbard who came up with that.
Murray Rothbard.
Yes, he's
okay. And is he an anarchist?
He was. He's actually the person who came up with Anarcho Capitalism. Okay. So you'll hear people say they're Rothbardians. You'll hear people say they're anarcho-capitalists, voluntarists. So that's where the non-aggression principle comes from. That's our starting premise. So basically, what the non-aggression principle is don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. Like and it's hard to argue with that, right? Like, we tell our kids that, don't hit people, don't take their stuff. Like, right. You can't, it's hard to argue with that. The difference between an anarchist like myself and most other people is, I would say I'm consistent with that. Like, whether you wear a badge or not, you should play by those rules. Whereas if you believe in the state, you'd have to have some people who don't have to play by those rules. Like an IRS agent can take somebody's stuff. Right. So they don't play by those rules. But you asked me about the police departments, and that's a good one. I appreciate that. What would you do with a police department? And one thing to recognize is, in the United States, in particular, we have more private security officers in America than we have police officers. So recognizing that there could be private forms of security isn't a far stretch. You could have private security.
But the private security teams are given their authority from local police departments. You have to, if you arrest somebody as a private security team, you don't put them in the private jail, right? You take them to the local authorities and they put them in jail. You can't just privately arrest somebody and kidnap them and keep them there. And so there's a big disconnect on those two.
Yeah, and I think that to understand that, we'd probably have to go a step farther and understand what would the court system look like, because in order to hold somebody, you would need to have due process, and you'd have to have some sort of court system. So we would in an anarcho system, there would be courts, and they would be private courts. So let's go through a scenario. Let's imagine that somebody breaks into my house, and I call my private security force, and they come and they arrest the guy. So somebody in this anarcho system. So imagine I'm living in an anarcho system. Somebody breaks into my house. I call my private security firm that I've hired, just like you can hire a what are the home protection agencies that have, like, they monitor calls and monitor people hire them all the time. So I call them, they come out, they send a guy out they arrest the guy. The next step would be to go to court. And in order for you to take him to court, it would have to be a court where he agrees to go to and I agree to take him to, or my security team agrees to take him to. You also have the issue of he might have his own security team. Part of me having a security team is I don't want people handcuffing me and throwing me in the back of a car and taking me somewhere. So those two security teams might negotiate between each other instead of me and him negotiating directly. That's probably what would happen. But imagine that he and I negotiate directly. I say, hey, listen, you took some stuff out of my house. He says, no, you kidnapped me against my will. I think you're in the wrong. He says, I think, we're both in the wrong. So I say, I want to go to this court who tends to be really, really harsh on people who break into houses. And he says, no, I want to go to this court that tends to be really, really harsh on people kidnapping other people. And I say, no, I don't agree to your court. You don't agree to my court. So we eventually meet in the middle, right? We compromise. So we go to a court. The court decides, and the court can decide an injunction against this person, whether that be, most justice in a anarcho system, I would assume, would become based on restitution rather than retribution. So rather than sending him into a cage for so long for what he did, he'd probably have to restore to me whatever he took, plus some punitive. So that's a very 30,000 feet overview of what I think it would look like.
So a couple of things. I understand the restitution instead, but the issue I have with that is that at any point, if I'm low on cash and I need a loan, all I have to do is just go steal from somebody for a while and then pay it back when I'm finished. That to me, you have to have something extra as an incentive or de-incentivize them or from committing the crimes. So why would they not commit the crime in the first place if all they're doing is breaking even in the end?
Right. And it's important that they don't break even, or it's not just breaking even, because let's say somebody breaks into my house and they steal my TV. If they restore my TV to me after 3 weeks, I was still out a TV for 3 weeks. So they haven't made full restitution just by restoring the TV to me. They have made a partial restitution. So they would have to do something in addition to restoring the TV. You could also say there was an element of fear involved in the fact that they violated my home. They broke in, they put me in danger. So there's some sort of fear involved that they need to make restitution for that as well. So it's not merely a one-to-one restitution of you took a TV, therefore you have to give the value of a TV back. You took a TV, therefore you have to give the value of the TV back plus some sort of interest on the time that the TV was gone, plus some sort of payment for the undue fear that was involved in you breaking into my house.
Okay. And so I guess the most obvious question here is, what if they don't want to go to court? What if they say, no, I'm not going to your court? Who is it that has authority over this situation that could force them to go to court?
And that's where you have to recognize I did a wrong to them by having my security guy arrest them and put them into they're being held by my security guy. So they have an incentive to go to court, because if I'm holding them for wrong reasons, then they want to go to court because I'm in the wrong. So if they refuse to go to any court, then I just take them to my preferred court and we settle it there. So they actually do have an incentive to try to negotiate with me about the court that we go to, and to go to one that's more reasonable.
Yeah, but again, what if they don't? What if they don't?
If they don't, I'm holding them as my security team's holding them as a as a prisoner, just like the state
And
would.
where are you holding them? In your house? In your basement?
I'm assuming my security team has a place for people like that.
So everybody has to hire their own security team if they want any sort of, if they don't want crimes committed against them, they need to be paying a security team.
Just like now, instead of being forced to pay a security team, you would probably voluntarily pay one. Or it might be, you might be part of like a homeowners association or a gated community, and that gated community would have their own license. And that's, I think a lot of people who live in neighborhoods, unless you're in a really rural area, I think most people would volunteer to join some sort of neighborhood coalition for that sort of thing.
Okay.
But you could now I'll put myself on the spot here and say, what about like 10 houses on your block join that coalition and one house doesn't? Like, what happens to that house? And that's something to that's probably a tough challenge for us. But I would say that that they just wouldn't have the rights. If somebody broke into their house, they would have a harder time getting that security taken care of.
Yeah, I just think, you know what, if I steal your TV, your security team comes after me, I'm just going to kill your whole security team. Now they're all gone. Now I'm
Why don't you do that with the police now?
Because there's so many levels of police to where you can never get to an ending point. You have local police, you have state police, you have SWAT, you have military, you have FBI, you've got CIA, NSA. Like, there are so many levels to this, to where if you're playing Grand Theft Auto, your stars will continue to build up on the corner of your screen, and more and more and more will come after you until you're just overpowered. They don't just disappear if you just get rid of them.
But as I was saying a little bit ago, there are actually more private security officers in the United States than there are public security. And that's with taxes already paying for the public security. So people are paying their taxes for police, and they're paying for this additional private security. I would imagine if you take that tax away where they're already paying for the police, there might even be more private security.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but you're talking about these being private businesses that are all going to be separate. You've got a security team here. This person's got their own security team. Maybe my security team has an issue with your security team, but my security team's bigger than your security team. What you going to do about it? You got nothing.
So now security teams, a private security team that has to get people to voluntarily join them is going to be disincentivized from engaging in a sort of warfare. The reason being, if I hold
on. I get what you're saying with that.
Okay.
I do, but there are gangsters out there. There are people who are willingly doing this already without a whole lot of incentive. So it's not hard to imagine people who would want to just go and kill a bunch of other people just because they think they can get away with it.
But mainly governments do that.
Sure, governments do it too, but let's focus on citizens right now. Citizens also do it. I've lived in New York. I've lived in Atlanta. There are lots of gangs around here who are willing to do all sorts of crazy things because they think they can get away with it. And I think in your system, it would be so much easier to get away with it. But even on top of that, say these gangsters just turn into their own security team. You can't do anything about it. Just because there's more security people doesn't mean that they're all working for your team or they're on your side.
With the private security firms would not be incentivized to create violence. They would be disincentivized to do that, because if I'm a private security officer, if I engage in violence with somebody, so like that gang who creates their own private security, nobody's going to hire them because they're going to bring an element of violence with them. Like the mafia, like right now, the people do hire the mafia as private security now, because the police are the police are terrible at a lot of the things they do. The government just isn't very efficient. So people are taxed to pay for police, and then they hire additional security on top of that.
Right.
So people do hire the mafia now, but if all security were privatized, you wouldn't have an incentive to create violence. Because let's say I own a Walmart, right, and I have a private security there, and I've got a choice between one firm who is notorious for decapitating shoplifters, and I hire another firm who is very famous for preventing shoplifting without causing many people harm. I'm going to go with the security firm that doesn't cause people harm, because I don't want people terrified to shop at my place of business. That security firm that does things the most peacefully, the most peaceful way, is going to grow larger. The larger security firms are going to be the more peaceful security firms.
Yes, but this makes it easier for the other types of security forms to take place. So if you're telling me that everybody else is incentivized, or yes, there are incentives to not be violent, then it is easier for me and my security team to be violent. As long as we can find the people who are willing to take the risk, and we charge more money for this violence, and we're able to just put you in a bubble to where nobody's going to mess with you because they know we will kill them if they do, then it makes it easier for me, just one security team, to overpower 100, because everybody knows that we're the ones who are going to get it done and they are not.
Your problem would be, though, that my security, let's say I have the peaceful security team, you have the militant security team. My security team is getting a lot of big clients, big money clients. I've got the resources. I'm loaded with money. I'm the one who's more like who have the resources, more like the state at this point. You're like the little the gang in New York that you had before. My security firm is more powerful than yours, because I'm peaceful, because I avoid violence whenever possible. So if you're violent to one of my guys, yeah, we would take you down. But we avoid that and only use it as a last resort. Versus police officers today, like in the state system, in the government system, you see it's hard to go a day without seeing police officers abusing their authority. In a private security system, that would be the last thing you would want to do. You would never want to have one of your officers be filmed beating up somebody because they're of a different color. Right, that would be the last thing you want to have happen. You train this so it would never happen. And but whenever you're the state and you have a problem with police violence, guess what you do? You raise taxes so you can provide your police with more training. It's actually the opposite incentive of what you want.
Kind of, though, because there's already incentives, like the fact that you need to be reelected as governor or mayor or police commissioner. And if you are a police officer and you want to get your paycheck and you want to stay on your insurance and all of those things, you already have lots of incentives not to do these sorts of things anyways. Why would that be more incentive than it already is?
Because budgets are important. Budgets are very important. So if I know that there's a problem with police brutality in my state, and I run for governor, and I could say, hey, elect me as governor. I'm going to put all this money into training police officers, all this money into providing police officers with these additional resources, so they're less likely to engage in this police brutality. So what these police departments now see is a budget increase because of their bad behavior. Whereas if you're a private firm and you're engaged in this kind of behavior, fewer people are going to hire you. You're going to see a budget decrease because of the bellicose behavior, because of the violence that you're engaged in. So it's actually quite opposite incentive-wise whenever you're private versus whenever you're public.
Okay. And you believe that anarcho capitalism is backed up in the Bible, correct?
I would say it's hard to find any specific system of government. I would say that if you go to the Old Testament, you see God's preferred system was more of what was in Judges rather than in First Samuel. He was very upset whenever they demanded, whenever the Israelites demanded a king. He thought that the prior system was preferable, although that wasn't ideal either. You saw everybody living according to their own rules. So I don't think the Bible is very clear on precisely the type of government that you have. But I do think that just if you look at the basic theme of the Bible, where you're supposed to love your neighbor, you're not supposed to steal, you're supposed to treat others as you would like to be treated. I think that precludes a lot of the things that a modern state does.
Yeah, but like you said, I mean, it does support all sorts of different kinds of especially economic systems. I mean, this is a conversation that I had with a bunch of people the other day where they were trying to tell me that the Bible only supports things like capitalism because capitalism gives you more freedom of choice, whereas socialism is forced upon you. And I was like, well, actually, the Bible, one, Jesus said, give to Caesar what is his. Two, it says it has all of these things like the Good Samaritan, where it shows that like we're all responsible for each other, and need. It's not just that we should help each other, but we're also responsible for each other. And then on top of that, capitalism is forced upon you as well. I mean, you can't say that that socialism would be forced on you, but capitalism's not forced on you. Like you don't have much of a choice in either one if that's the way that your government goes.
Now, I would say that I want to say capitalism is forced upon you. If you'd go back to your example of living on a desert island, let's just say it's just you and one other person, and you collect shells and use your shells to create a shovel, and this increases your product. You now have capital. It increases your productivity, and because your productivity has increased, you're able to hire that one other person to do things on the island for you. You are now a capitalist. Were either of you forced into being a capitalist in that? To me, it sounds like you both just made private decisions and capitalism just developed.
Kind of, yes. For people who have only ever lived in socialism, it's hard for them to understand what it would be like to live in a capitalist world. When you say that, the means of labor are owned privately, they'd be like, what? What does that even mean? Like, how could that be possible? But it's the same for the opposite for us, where when people say like, oh, well, actually the mode of production is owned by the government, you'd be like, what? How does that work? How do they decide what does and what doesn't get made? Like, why wouldn't the market dictate that? It's hard for us to understand if we've never lived in that way, but for people who have only ever lived that way, the other seems kind of radical.
Are you familiar with the Ludwig von Mises, his socialist calculation problem?
No, I don't think so.
All right. He explains the problem, and I don't think anybody's been able to refute this with socialism, having to do with the problem is with prices. It's impossible for a socialist system to accurately figure out the price for something. Because let's say you want to create a plant that makes, let's say you want to make a plant that makes tires. Okay, and you need to figure out where to locate this plant. Do you locate it right next door to the plant that makes automobiles? Do you make it locate it right next door to a major city population? Where do you put this plant? Well, in a capitalist system, you look at land prices. Like you say, okay, how much is it going to if I put my plant right next to the rubber trees? How much is it going to take to ship finished tires to the population center? So I can look at land prices, I can look at shipping prices, I can look at all that and determine what society's saying that I should do with where I should locate my plant, how much, whether I should make my tires out of low grade rubber or higher grade rubber. That's all done through prices. In a purely socialist system, you don't have prices like that to determine what society needs, what society wants, and it's a universal problem. Sometimes a socialist system can borrow prices from capitalist systems. They can say this product's going for about this much in a capitalist system, therefore we will bring that price over to our system. The problem with that is you look at two different capitalist systems. A hamburger probably doesn't sell for the same price here as a hamburger does in Switzerland, because tastes are different. So transferring prices across borders doesn't really work well. But they need price. You need prices in order for socialism to work.
Socialist countries can come up with prices exactly the same way as we come up with prices through capitalism, where they just try to figure out what the demand is for this product and set a price based on that and based on how much it costs and everything else. They don't need to go look at a capitalist system to figure out how much demand there is. When you can see how much this product is selling, you can set a price that way. But they try to set prices based more on how well their economy can afford it, instead of how much the product is worth in a capitalist system.
Prices are set by people making voluntary choices. That's what causes prices to
sure.
adjust and fluctuate.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm saying that when you try to decide how much a price is, though, you can still make that same decision in a capitalist system with the same exact system, by how many people decided to buy that product and how much they were willing to spend on it.
The problem is that you don't know the costs that go into manufacturing the product. You don't know if you should make a product out of rubber or out of plastic, because you don't know what the choice in the market decides. Basically, profits are important in a capitalist system. Profits don't really exist in a socialist system. Profits are the rewards for using scarce resources in the way that the society dictates is the most productive for society. Their resources are scarce. There's only so much land that can be used. There's only so much labor out there. There's only so many natural resources. It's all scarce. If I'm using a natural resource to make a widget, you can't use that same natural resource to make a what's-it, right? Like you can't. So we need to figure out as a society, is it better to use this natural resource for a widget or for a what's-it? So let's say you're making what's-its, I'm making widgets. I produce these widgets and I make a profit. What that's telling me, that's sending a signal that society likes my widgets more than they liked the resources that went into them. If you made your what's-its and you had a loss, that's telling you that society actually like the resources themselves before you even touch them. They like the resources more than they like your product. So it's a sign that you're wasting society's resources. Without profits, you don't have that signal. You're wasting resources. All throughout society, resources must be wasted if you don't have profit signals.
Or it could also mean that you have a poor price.
But you don't know if you're because you own all the means of production. Since you own everything along the way, you don't even know if you're suffering a loss. So you won't know if you have a poor price because you don't even know what your investment is to know what your losses would be. You've got to know what your investment is to know what your losses are.
I don't agree with that at all. I think that you can compartmentalize different sections of businesses and say, okay, this one is spending this much on this many things. Everything's not all of a sudden free just because it's socialized. It still costs money, and there's still different departments that have to make an exchange. It's just and so therefore you have a set cost that your product endures every single time, and then you can set prices based on that all the same. The only difference is in socialism, they can say, we want to sell this for less than what it actually is worth because we think the public needs it that much more.
So I don't understand how you can say that they know what the prices are worth. Like if the government owns all the means of production, completely owns the means of production, and you say that they're able to determine how much they're spending on those means of production, they own it all. So if I need to buy land for a plant, I'm buying it from myself. How am I supposed to know how much that costs? The price has got to be arbitrary.
It wouldn't be arbitrary. It's just the same as when cryptocurrency comes out. It's a completely different sort of thing, and it's exchanged in a completely different way, but we're still able to figure out how this is monetized in comparison to the US dollar or anything else.
But with cryptocurrency, you have a number of buyers, a number of sellers. If the government owns the entire means of production, you have one buyer, you have one seller. So if somebody wants to, if one government agency wants to build a plant on this piece of land that's owned by the government,
but again, it's
they would have to buy it. You're saying they would have to buy it from the government, but who sets that price? The government just sets it arbitrarily. Like, how do they determine what that price is? There's no like market interaction for them to figure out if that price should be high, should be low, what?
I don't know where we're getting lost on this. I guess we're not like the government is still essentially a business in this case, and they're able to set their own prices, but there's other little businesses below them with other people in charge of those. And this is all compartmentalized where they're able to keep their own books and look at what they're buying from the government or what their resources are and how much it costs in comparison to everybody else. Not every other country. I mean, like in every other business as well. Like if the government is setting a price and their, your euros or your currency is worth however much, you're still able to kind of get a sense of what your product is supposed to be worth and how much you're actually spending on it compared to how much your buyers are spending on it.
But that price has got to be arbitrary. You've said several times, if the government's setting the price, in a market system where prices aren't arbitrary, prices aren't really set; they're determined by the market.
Right. But they can still be determined. That's my entire point: is that they can still be determined. They can choose whether or not to change that, though. It can still be determined the same as it is here. Through demand, but they can just choose whether or not to change that based on how much their economy needs these things. And I'm not in favor of socialism whatsoever. I think it's a horrible system altogether, mainly because I don't think you can have a central mode for everything else that can just take care of all of that by themselves. I think that that's a disastrous way for things to work out.
Yeah, Yeah, socialism doesn't work for a number of reasons. I think that one of the things that as an anarcho-capitalist, the capitalist part of me, recognize that value is subjective. What you value and what I value are different. And the beautiful thing about capitalism is it's all based on voluntary trade. So if I want to trade something with you, in order for us to make that transaction happen, you have to give me something that I value more than what I'm giving you. Likewise, you have to value what I'm giving you more than what you're giving me. So anytime we engage in trade, both you benefit and I benefit, right? Like otherwise we wouldn't make the trade. So every single trade that happens in a capitalist society, both parties benefit, as long as everything's voluntary. And I think that capitalism is the best way to increase that subjective value that people have on things, just because the more that's traded, the more people are benefiting. Whereas in a socialist system, you don't have that mutual beneficial relationship.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just profit and demand or things like that, but there's also how much money the Fed has flooded into the system. And so if we don't have a government, if we don't have a Fed that is making money or like actually printing dollar bills and
yeah, making money means something different when you're talking about the Fed. Sure. Like you and I like to make money. The Fed really likes to make money.
Right. Yes, but if they don't, if they have prints and they have mints that are actually creating these things, how is it that in an anarcho system without these points of government, how is it that we do this? Are we just bartering now? Like what are we doing for money?
Well, you have to recognize the Fed didn't exist before 1913, and the United States was doing okay before then. There would be different forms of currency. Probably gold would be the number one form of currency. I can't guarantee, because market forces would have to determine these. But gold would probably be the biggest form of currency. You'd probably see a lot of deflation, where things go down in price, like you saw throughout a lot of the late 19th century. Things continue decline in prices. Banks could issue currency. So a well-established bank with their own gold reserves could probably issue gold certificates that people could spend as cash. The better they manage their money, the more accepted their cash is going to be in society. So that would give them an incentive not to do a quantitative easing the way the Fed does. The Fed has no such incentive. Incentives matter a lot to me, if you haven't gathered this.
I mean, they have all sorts of incentives as well. They want the dollar bill to actually be worth a lot, especially when they owe debt to other countries and things like that. They have a lot of incentive for the dollar bill to be worth a good bit more than everybody else's.
Actually, they as far as being a debtor, they'd rather the dollar bill be as far as them being in debt, they'd rather the dollar bill be weak, because you imagine there's if somebody owes me $30,000, and then there's a hyperinflationary period where a loaf of bread costs $30,000. Guess what? That guy who owes me, he's thinking this is great. Now I just need to give him the equivalent of a loaf of bread. So the Fed actually has an incentive to inflate the currencies because of debt. So it's yeah, their incentives are all messed up for the Fed.
But so you're saying the banks would actually print off these certificates for that are on like a gold standard.
Yeah.
But they could actually possibly have different I guess, different amounts of worth based on which bank you go to?
Potentially, because if a bank isn't a trustworthy, like right now we have what's called fractional reserve banking, where if 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 I have $100 in my bank, like I'm a banker, I have $100. Obviously, I'm not a very big banker, but I have $100 in my bank. I can loan out like $900. Or
Okay.
no, sorry, I'm exaggerating way too much. I could loan out like $190. So I've got $100 worth of gold. I can loan out $190 with fractional reserve banking. That's not a very good practice, though, because if everybody comes out and wants to withdraw their funds from me, I'm insolvent. So a bank that is overextending itself would become become evident to the market, and their currency wouldn't be worth as much as one that keeps 100% reserves. If there's a bank that keeps 100% reserves, their gold certificates are going to be just as valuable as gold on the market. So eventually what you would have happen is all banks would approach that 100% reserve currency.
Okay. And so one of the issues that somebody had with the last guy who came on is he says, well, what happens when I go broke? What happens when I lose all my money or I'm so in debt that I cannot claim something like bankruptcy and my house is on fire? I can't call the fire department now because I don't have any money to give them. Or I can't call the police department to stop this person from raping me because I don't have any money to pay the police department with. So, what are answers for things like this outside of credit? Because I don't think credit is going to be good enough, especially when you have no clue if these people are ever going to have money again.
Yeah, the fire department one I always think is kind of funny because I spent most of my life in communities that had no professional fire department. They were all volunteer fire departments. Right now I'm living in a town where tax money goes to a fire department, but most of my life it's all been volunteer. Whenever they needed a new fire truck, they have bingo, and that's how they would raise their money for a new fire truck. So it's not unheard of to have fire departments that are run completely voluntarily.
Sure.
And with on top of the fire one, I think is really easy, not only because of that, but also because I think that homeowners insurance is going to cover, and maybe even some of the security as well. Homeowners insurance would cover a lot of fire protection, stuff like that. If I'm going to insure your home, I might want to make sure that you have a sprinkler system. And like if you say you've got a priceless Mona Lisa in your home and you want to insure it, I'm going to be like, you got a sprinkler system in there in case of a fire? But
again, we're talking about people who don't have any money, though. We're talking about the poorest of the poor. Sure. We're talking about people who are barely making it at all in the first place. Right now, if I'm living paycheck to paycheck and I can't endure like a $500 crisis, then I probably can't get robbed more than once every 2
a lifetime.
or 3 months.
I'd rather not be robbed more than once in a lifetime.
Yes, sure, but it's a matter of whether or not you can afford to get robbed now. Not just a matter of whether or not you're going to get robbed, but it's a matter of whether or not I can afford to be assaulted, whether or not I can afford to get raped, whether or not I can afford to get shot, whether or not I can afford to get, there's my car gets run into, like I have an accident. So people are just running into me, but I can't pay a cop now to investigate this scenario to figure out whose fault it is. And so now I'm just screwed with a car that doesn't work.
Part of that would be based on voluntary associations that people might be part of. Your church would certainly be a means of support. You look back before we had a lot of social programs. The hospitals in my area are all named like Saint this or Saint that, or like we have Pittsburgh Presbyterian Hospital. Like they were all started by churches because there was charity. There weren't social programs, so churches stood up and did exactly what Jesus was calling them to do. Now churches don't have to do that because Uncle Sam steps in and does what churches used to do. So there is that. There's also non-religious social institutions. Several years ago, I was reading that in the first part of the 20th century, African Americans were more likely to have life insurance than white people were, which I was astonished by, because you're looking at the era of Jim Crow, like an era where like today, a lot of people can't have life insurance because they can't fit it into their budget. But in the era of Jim Crow, people could fit it in their budget. Like, what was up with that? And what it was most, or I don't know if it was most, but a lot of Black families were part of fraternal organizations, Black fraternal organizations. And those fraternal organizations had life insurance for all of their members. So different in a stateless society, those would become more popular. Churches will become more popular. An advantage of both of those things that the government doesn't have is they're able to discriminate in the best of ways. The government's not very good at. The Bible says, "Let he who does not work not eat." He who refuses to work not eat. I should clarify.
Yeah, our man should eat by the sweat of his brow.
Yeah. So the government's not good at determining whether you're just being lazy or whether you have a legitimate reason not to work. Your church, though, knows. Like we know who the guys are who are just not putting in much effort at our church. So churches are actually better at making those types of decisions than a government is.
But this is a very small solution. I mean, especially in a country where being religious is becoming smaller and smaller by the day. Religious institutions aren't that big of a help, especially when we consider where we'll be in about 20 years. They say that we'll be down to about 25% of the population being religion, since most of the religious people are very old right now.
Well, I think the biggest religion we have in America is state worship. And if we get rid of the people who worship the,
let me guess, what side do you think is worshiping the state? Can I take a stab in the dark on this one?
Go ahead. But no, I seriously, I do. I went to a day of prayer event that started out with the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, this is a day of prayer. Like, who are we praying to? Then there was a poem recited to the flag. Like, it was second person. The flag was who they were talking to.
Right.
There's some state worship going on.
Sure.
So I think you get rid of the state worship and get rid of some of the idols, and people come back to the church. But like I said, not all of it was handled by churches. There were fraternal organizations. There were and if you look at states, the tax rates in states versus charitable contributions, you'll notice that states with higher tax rates tend to have less charitable contributions. So the lower the tax rates, the higher the charitable contributions are. If you look at a state-by-state basis in the United States. So if the tax rates were zero, I would anticipate a much higher portion of people's income they would be willing to donate to charities, whether that charity be their local church or a charity that helps out the person who just lost his job, his house is on fire, his house was being robbed as it caught fire. And what was the other thing? I can't remember what the other thing
Getting
was.
raped?
Getting raped. This guy is really down on his luck, but there'd be charities there helping out.
Well, we have issues with charities taking care of things right now, though. I mean, if charities were taking care of everything, we wouldn't have gotten things like welfare. We wouldn't have people like Bernie Sanders wanting to socialize everything, if charities were doing as much as we want them to do. And honestly, I believe in charities. I believe that they could work if people put their faith in them. I believe that they could work if people actually donated to them. I think it's ridiculous. All of these people who were like, hey, we need to force everybody to give their money to the government so that we can all have insurance. And I'm like, well, why not just give your money to organizations that are already trying to give people insurance? They're like, oh, no, that doesn't work. And I'm like, yes, I know it doesn't work because you guys all pretend you want everybody to have insurance, but it's only when you're being forced to pay it. If you had to give it voluntarily, you just wouldn't give it, and you're not giving it. The right wingers are giving something like double the amount of charity every single year compared to the left. And so while it seems
and right wing states taxes tend to be lower. So you're saying it's an ideological reason they're giving more to charity. I think it might have something to do with their taxes being a little bit lower. They have a little bit more to give to it.
I mean, but which came first, man?
It's probably a little of the both. Yep. I think we're both probably a little right.
Yeah, I would assume that they weren't giving enough to charities to the point where they had to raise taxes in order to take care of these things as a state. They had to raise taxes to be able to take care of these things themselves. And so I truly believe in charity, but I think that in a society like we have today, charities are not going to do the trick maybe 50 years ago, but it doesn't seem like that's the case now.
Now, I think that it's interesting what you point out about if charities were being effective, why did we end up with all the social programs that we have? And that's a legitimate point. But I would I don't know the numbers with charity. I do know with youth. Why can't child labor laws? You often see charts where it shows like first child labor law was introduced on the x-axis, and then you see on the y-axis, and then you see the amount of child labor going down. And it's like, oh, well, this law was really effective. What they don't show you is before that, child labor was going down. And then they passed a law, and then it kept going down. Because what people see is they see, hey, we're now becoming wealthy enough as a society that we don't have to deal with this problem that's always been a problem ever since the beginning of time. Kids have worked. Likewise, ever since the beginning of time, there have been people in poverty. There have been people hungry. There have been people who don't have medical care. That's a problem that's always existed. But the richer we became as a country, the more people got upset with it. So my guess is that the number of people in poverty was declining whenever it was being handled by churches. But people said, but because people started seeing that discrepancy a little bit more, people still demanded that the government stepped in, just like they did with child labor.
Yeah, I think the wealth in our country, that argument can go either way. I mean, people like to say, well, as rich as our country is, we should be able to afford to give everybody insurance. But at the same time, you could also have any third world country with people being like, we're all too poor to afford insurance, so they should give us all insurance. I mean, you look at that argument and then you think, wow, maybe in the United States, like, we're so good off that it would be ridiculous for us to just give everybody insurance. But I mean, that's not really the case.
On the insurance thing, I was just thinking about this the other day. Like people say they want like something like Canada's healthcare system in the United States. Canada, I think they have a population of like 14 million people, I think. The United States has a population of 330 million. So they say that a single payer system will work with 13 million people. They say it'll work with 300 million people. My guess is if both of those are true, accepting that both of those are true, I don't, but assuming for the argument that it is, then it should work for a population of like 63 million, right? That's somewhere in the middle. Well, there are about 63 million people who voted for Hillary Clinton. In an anarcho system, those 63 million people could pool together. Actually, in our current system, those 63 million people can pool together and create a healthcare system. And they can create a system that works for them. So if it'll work for 13 million and it'll work for 300 million, it should work for those 63 million. And I don't know why they don't just pool their money together and create a healthcare system. It seems to be what they want, but for some reason they don't do it. I don't understand it.
Yeah, there's actually a I forget what the name of it is. I've mentioned this on numerous other episodes. I think it's called Christian Share or something like that, where it is actually a bunch of people who start off. I think you start off with like a $200 deposit. Okay, and so they have this giant like bank account where everybody who goes to the doctor then is withdrawing from this account, and then they send a bill to their thousands of members, splitting this up between everybody. And that way they start off with everybody depositing $200 into it, and then all you're doing is paying just for what the medical bills cost after that. And normally if you don't have insurance, these things cost a lot more, but they're just reimbursing everybody for whatever it did cost. And I think, why don't these people just do this? Like, it's already been created. Why aren't they just doing it? Why do they think they have to have a president take over and then manipulate the entire system just to get this pushed through when they can just do it themselves?
Yeah, it's got to have something to do with power. I really don't understand it. Like, to me, it's got to be something with power. Like, they just love the power of getting everybody to go along with you for something. And that's not appealing to me.
So if you were to pick a country that was as close as possible to anarcho capitalism, what country do you think that is right now?
I gut instinct, because I haven't done a lot of research on this.
Sure.
I would say probably Switzerland.
Switzerland, don't they
Yeah.
have a lot of social programs over there?
They have a lot of business freedom. A lot of business freedom in Switzerland. I don't think their social programs are. I do think they have like a government healthcare system.
Yes.
But I don't think their social systems are much more intrusive than other European countries. They have a lot of things like you know what their minimum wage is in Switzerland?
No, I don't.
0.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. That's right. I saw this. It actually went up. They got rid of minimum wage, and the wages actually went up.
Yeah. They're and they have they're again. I don't want to say this definitively because I haven't done a lot of research on it, but I think they have kind of like a very loose confederation of municipalities there, where it's very easy to switch governments. Like if you don't like what your town's doing, move 10 feet. Now you're in a new government. So I think that level of competition helps to minimize the intrusiveness of government.
Yeah, I saw something before where I was trying to find what people thought was the most what was the closest thing to an ANCAP system. And what I found was that people who were anarcho-capitalists believed that Uruguay was the closest thing to an ANCAP system. The people who were not ANCAP believed that Mexico was the closest thing to an ANCAP system. And they said that the proof is in how corrupt everything has become, where everything is just about the almighty dollar, and whoever pays the most literally owns that thing, and to the point where you can even pay enough to own the president of the United States if your cartel is big enough. And that is what I would imagine happening if we actually had a purely ANCAP system. It would be that everything became corrupt, that the richest people were able to buy whatever they wanted because there's nobody actually to stop them now. There isn't and I'm sure you're going to tell me there's some sort of incentive. I am sorry, I don't believe in any of your incentives, but I'm sure you're going to tell me there's some
There's
sort of
probably incentive to stop it.
Yes, for why the president doesn't want to take these hundreds of millions of dollars from the cartels or from the mob or from the, whoever else.
In an anarcho system, to be fair, there'd be no president.
Yes, I understand that, but my point is that if you're able to corrupt all of these different forms of government right now, and you're able to corrupt these big, large businesses right now, why wouldn't you be able to corrupt all of these small security teams? Why wouldn't you be able to corrupt these judges? Why wouldn't you be able to corrupt literally everything that we right now have a system for to keep them from being corrupted within government? Why, if all that matters is how much you pay for it in the end, then why wouldn't they all become corrupt?
The competition is a good reason for them not being corrupt. Right now, we have a monopoly. We have. Oh, okay. I didn't know if you could hear me or not. Okay, we have a monopoly system, right? We have one government that provides all of this. So if you want to, if you're corrupt and you want to bribe somebody, guess how many people you got to bribe? Well, how many systems you got to bribe? One. You got to bribe the government, and you've got everybody covered. In a system where there's multiple competing firms, you would have to, if you're corrupt and you want to start bribing people, you've got to bribe a lot of different people. And sure, those systems that are being corrupted by the bribes are going to work less efficiently than the ones that aren't being corrupted. And
but
the ones who aren't
I would say that's more so. I would say that's more so now than it would be in that system. While we have all of these checks and balances, you would have to corrupt a lot more people now than you probably would in that system, where in that system you just have to corrupt the person at the top and everything flows downhill from there.
But there wouldn't be just one person. In our current system, yeah, there's one person at the top. You got the president.
I mean, for each one of these businesses, for each one of these security firms, or for each one of these courts.
Theoretically, you could corrupt one of the firms. But if there are 50 firms operating in your neighborhood and you corrupt one of them, it's going to cost you so much more money because you got to corrupt 50 instead of just one. Whereas right now you just have the one. There's a monopoly. What government is, all government is a monopoly organization on the use of force. That's all they are. That's what you can define government as, a monopoly organization on the use of force. And with a monopoly, it's easier to corrupt.
Yeah, I've heard it called the government, or I've heard people say that the government is just a monopoly on the use of force, and I personally don't have an issue with that. Like, I think that somebody has to have a monopoly on the use of force. The last time the United States didn't have one monopoly on the use of force, we ended up with a civil war. So I think that it's okay when you end up with one monopoly that has one I guess brand that has a monopoly on the use of force.
Well, I would disagree with you on America having a civil war ever. A civil war requires two or more factions fighting over the control of one form of government.
Sure, but
the Confederates were not fighting to control Washington, D.C.
No, but they were. We have states that were technically being run as their own entities. They were their own countries with different rules and different laws in each state. And that became an issue over time. And that's how we ended up with a civil war. They had their own governments in 50 different states that,
Sure,
or I guess not 50, but
a state going to war with a separate state is not a civil war. If the state of Germany goes to war with the state of France, that's not a civil war.
well, that's why they called it a union. It may not be a civil war for that one state, but it was a civil war for the entire union.
Well, but the southern states weren't fighting for control of the union in a civil war.
But the northern states were.
Right. The northern
Right.
states were trying to were fighting to control the southern. Like whenever Hitler, you could say Hitler, whenever he invaded Poland, was fighting for control of one union. Poland was not. So it wasn't a civil war. Poland's like, we just want to rule Poland. We don't care about Germany. Just like the southern states were not fighting to control Washington, D.C. It wasn't a civil war. It was the same as like Hitler invading Poland.
No, Poland was already separate from Germany at that point, though.
And
what I'm saying is this is still one country in the end. It's just different states acting as different countries. But they're not actually different countries.
It was actually several states formed in forming a confederation or a federation or a confederation, whatever you want to call it. Just like the United Nations is not one country, right? The United Nations isn't one country. Sure. Nation's like another word for state. So United Nations is not one country. United States was not one country either. It was actually several countries.
Is just an alliance.
That's actually what the United States were too. Actually, in as a matter of fact, in the first 50 years of the United States' existence, the United States were referred to in the plural form, with U being lowercase, S being uppercase, where you would say like the United States are sending ships over to the Barbary nations. It was the United States are because it was a collection of states, of different states. It wasn't a single state. It wasn't a single nation state. It was a collection of different states.
With a collection of states with one constitution.
Right. Just like the United Nations has one charter. But you want to say it's one...
You violate the United Nations, they don't come over to with their military to take over. Like they can't.
Until Lincoln,
it'd be a group of other countries.
Until Lincoln, the United States didn't do that either. It wasn't there was no civil war. It was a war between northern states versus southern states. They weren't fighting over control of a single union.
I guess even right now, we still have corruption issues. We still have corruption even with the government. And so with a government that is the biggest incentive I can think of, is to break the law, get locked up, have all of your things taken from you by the government. They have large incentives to avoid corruption. And if that authority was taken away, then I would say that there's less incentive than there was before. You might say it's still better, but I'm saying in terms of corruption, I think that the incentives that are there now would definitely be gone and they wouldn't be replaced.
So you're saying because of the level of corruption in the current state, the state system has failed?
I'm saying because of the level of corruption right now, it would be worse under an anarcho capitalism system.
I disagree. I think that the more authorities you have, the harder it is to corrupt. It's easier to corrupt a very bureaucratic up-down system than it is a diverse system. If one member of a diverse body gets cancer, you can cut it off. But if you only have this, if it's the federal government that gets cancer, it's going to infect the whole thing. There's no way to cut it. Well, I would like to cut it out, but there's no feasible way right around the corner to cut that cancer out.
Yeah. And so, what would a transition be like? Because this is a conversation that I have with socialists all the time, where I explain to them like there is not there's not an ideal way to transfer from capitalism to socialism. Like so much to a point that it's literally impossible without us socializing like just one section of our country at a time, like one every 5 to 10 years, because each thing would just be too big of a project to do like every 6 months or every year or even every 2 years like that. So how would you be able to transition into something like this?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question, because right now the United States has the biggest government that's ever existed in the history of the world. If you look at the size of spending, the United States has the biggest government that's ever existed in the history of the world. How do you get rid of that? And the answer is I don't know. I wish I did, but I would. I think that it will be better once it's gone. However, the transition would be tough. You're looking at every dollar that the federal government spends is like a heroin addict using heroin, and they've used a lot. So to get off of heroin, I've never done it myself, so I don't know this, but from knowing people who have gone off of heroin, it's not comfortable. Whenever the United States finally decides to get off of this drug of federal government, there's going to be withdrawal pains, and it's going to be painful. It's going to be severe, and it's going to be tough. And frankly, I don't want to live through that process, but the afterwards, it will be worth it. So, and how does that process begin? I don't know. I think that the only way it would begin is with a massive economic collapse. Right now, the GDP, the debt to GDP ratio is over 100%. Our GDP is about 19.5 trillion. Our debt is about 22 trillion. So a collapse might be inevitable. And if that happens, I think that we would go in one of two directions, either towards more liberty in an anarcho capitalist way, or more tyranny in a socialist way.
Yeah, I think both sides are actually predicting that. They're saying that at this point we're going one direction or the other, but they don't believe one side is more liberty. They believe one side is either socialism yes, one side is either socialism or the other side is fascism, and it's one or the other, that the country has divided into those two directions, and that pretty soon there's going to be uprisings and one side or the other will win, but they don't mention anarcho capitalism being one of those sides.
Well, I don't think there's much difference between fascists and socialists myself. So if the two sides
The
are
horseshoe
fascists,
theory.
yeah, if the two sides are fascists and socialists, it's, either way to me, it would be horrible. Although I think one hope that there is, and it's just a small glimmer of hope, is that we see both the left and the right now on some level embracing secessionism, where you have people in California saying California just needs to secede from the union. People in Texas saying Texas just needs to secede from the union. And I think that if that happens and we end up with maybe not 50 independent states, but maybe 7 or 8 more regional states, then if California wants to go the more socialist route, but the American South and Alabama wants to go a more conservative route, then that's fine. That you would no longer have California's 50 some electoral votes dictating how you live in Alabama. And Alabama would no longer be trying to dictate how people live in California. So ideally, and really I think that would be better than what we have now. I think 50 would even be better. I think however many counties there are would even be better. And I think 330 million would be ultimate.
Yeah. Before we finish up, if anybody in the chat has any questions or anything you'd like us to bring up, go ahead and put that in the chat now. We'll read those in just a little bit. I have, like, for a long time, I felt the same way, where I thought that if we had every single state acting as its own country and having its own laws and things like that, then we might be best off that way. But after doing a lot of research into this, I saw that socialism is impossible to thrive in something that small. Even California did try a lot of like different things, like socializing healthcare and stuff like that, but it couldn't succeed because of how small they were as a state.
Well,
they needed the entire country to join in.
Don't Californians, though, for the most part, embrace somebody like Bernie Sanders, who praises the Scandinavian model? California's population is bigger than any of the Scandinavian countries.
Right.
So if they say that it works for Scandinavia, then shouldn't it work for California?
I guess, I mean, California has its own issues on top of that, to the point where, like, they already have taxes that are so high in the first place, to where they really had trouble adding more taxes on top of that for things like healthcare. But I don't know how countries like Scandinavia are able to do it, but from an economist standpoint, they seem pretty clear that no state could become socialist on its own without the entire country.
Well, from an economic standpoint, I don't think any socialist country could be successful at, period. So, but I'm just saying, from their standpoint, from a Californian standpoint, who does think that the Scandinavian model works, I don't see why they wouldn't think that it wouldn't work for California.
Hey, they just need to go full communist, and then they'll be okay. The communist countries seem to do it okay.
Hey, I'm all about going all in. Like, some people are limited government. I go all in. I just go anarchist. Like, some people say, I want a little bit of socialism. It's like, why not just go the whole way? Just go to communist. You know you want to.
Yeah, I as far as social, as far as socializing different things, I don't have too big of an issue with it as an idea, but I want to know where it ends. That's my issue. Is I don't feel like we can just keep saying, let's socialize this, let's socialize this, let's socialize this, until everything is socialized. I think we need to go ahead and figure out how far we're willing to take this. What is the max that we're willing to take this to before we socialize anything else? We need an answer to that. We need to know where this ends, because as soon as Bernie Sanders socializes, healthcare, then he wants to socialize broadband and internet. And then as soon as he socializes that, then he'll want to socialize, all schools, no more private schools. Everything's now a public school. And then, and then he'll socialize colleges, and then he'll he will just keep building and building. Nobody's getting rid of socialism. Nobody's getting rid of social programs. It's not getting smaller by any means. They're only adding to it. So we need to figure out at what point is it too much? At what point have we taken it too far? And we need to figure that out before we take it too far.
Yeah, and something that used to get asked for wars, but doesn't get asked anymore, unfortunately, for wars, is what's your exit strategy? Like, obviously, we have no exit strategy for any of the wars that we're in right now. But it used to be a good question. It was a legitimate question. It should be a question that's asked. But nobody ever asks that for a social program. Like, Social Security. Nobody likes Social Security. Like, you can't cut Social Security because people depend on it. They paid into it their whole lives. You can't cut it. You can't get rid of it. Right. But how many older people do you know who are like, yay, my Social Security check came in today, so now life is good. No, it's like if you're dependent on Social Security, you're in bad shape. So these social programs are failures, but there's no way to get out of them.
Right.
It's like the war in Afghanistan. It's a failure, but there's no way to get out of it. You're stuck.
Right. Yeah. Again, I don't have issues with social programs by themselves. I just need to know what the limit is. I need to know where it ends. I need to know, because before I can support anything being socialized now, I need to know that this isn't some slippery slope to socializing something else.
Well, socialism's like cancer. You can't have a little bit of it. It spreads. Or it's like yeast, to use more of a since we started this with a little bit of a religious socialism is like yeast. You put it in and it gets through the whole thing. So I don't think you have a little bit of it.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, we don't have any questions in the chat. Unless you have anything else.
No, go ahead. No, I think it was a good conversation. Thanks for having me on.
I do too. I appreciate you coming on. Anybody who's watching, hit the like button and the subscribe button, and then hit the bell. Don't forget to hit the bell. That is the most important part. We got a lot of videos coming out, and then every Saturday night we're doing streaming Saturdays, where we have just a big group of people jump into the chat, and then I will come in and we will start a topic, and everybody together will put their brains together and we will all share our knowledge on this one topic and try to find the truth on whatever it is that we're looking into on that day. So streaming Saturdays is going to be a lot of fun. We stream every Saturday around 8 on Facebook. So go check that out. And then you can also listen to all these podcasts on every other platform like Pandora, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio. They're all over the place. So I appreciate you coming on, John, and we'll see you guys next time.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks for tuning in to the Tomfoolery Podcast. If you'd like to hear more from Tomfoolery, you can check us out on facebook.com/tomfoolerypc. That's facebook.com/tomfoolerypc. You'll get all sorts of updates on new episodes coming out. You'll be able to watch clips and videos. And we even live stream once in a while on Facebook as well. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, go to twitter.com/tomfooleryp. Or if you'd like to email me, you can email me at tfoolery.pc@gmail.com. The Tomfoolery Podcast is currently available on these platforms: YouTube, Google Podcasts, Pandora, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and Podbean. It would be available on iTunes still if they didn't keep taking my podcast down. Later, fools.